Hey everybody, this is Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I hope that you are having a great day today. In today's video, we're going to talk about Redshirts, which was originally titled Redshirts, a novel with 3 codas. This was wrote by John Scalzi, originally published by Tor Books in June of 2012. This also won in 2013 an award, which was the Hugo Award for Best Novel, and also won the Locus Award for Best Science Fiction Novel. Not going to start out with spoilers. We're going to put a little timer somewhere around here. Yeah, somewhere around here. So watch that clock. When that clock hits 0, that's whenever you're going to start getting the details that you might not want to know if you haven't read this book. First, let me say, if I were to give an idea of what kind of a read this is, it goes by fast. And the reason for that is it's a completely unique kind of a book. Yes, it's sci-fi. Yes, it's space-driven. But instead of it being your typical humankind versus nature or space in most of those books' cases, it was not that way at all. Yes, those things are in it, but unless you read it, that statement really won't make that much sense. The main plots of the book I can't really get into without giving it away, which is kind of cool. I can tell you that it is a space sci-fi book that is filled with a couple of twists and a couple of turns that, quite frankly, I wasn't ready for. And here's why. Whenever I find an author that I really like, a lot of the times I simply don't read what the book they're writing is going to be about. I can tell you that it is a space sci-fi book that is filled with a couple of twists and a couple of turns that, quite frankly, I wasn't ready for. And here's why. A lot of the times whenever I read a book from an author that I already know, I typically don't read what the book is about so I can be surprised. And well was I. I have read a few of his books in the past. I started out with the Old Man's War series, and that was a really excellent series, and hence the reason why I just picked this one up and read it. There are many different character types in this book, from protagonists to people that think that they're protagonists, and then there are the other types that are the ambiguously open sexual people. And there are many parallels in between this book that I read and some of the space type phenomenons that we have already explored. If you've ever seen Star Trek, for one. And that's kind of a nod in the title to those people. The unfortunate people of the away teams, the Redshirts. They don't even have a name badge. They don't even have a chance, do they? The name of the ship is the Intrepid, which is the flagship of the Universal Union. Discovers that it needs some fresh meat. It seems to be running low on some staff, and they needed to go to a space dock to pick up some more ensigns, cannon fodder. There are 5 new ensigns that get onto the ship, and quickly they discern that something is just not quite right. And those things that aren't quite right has to do with the upper management. Like, people are somehow magically avoiding the top officers of the ship, especially Dahl. Dahl really figures this out quickly. There's an instance where there's this big calamity that's happened, and there's this individual that's sick, and Dahl is asked to put this thing in this big magic box, and Dahl kind of looks at the box suspiciously, because it's literally just a box. Whenever he puts it in the box, it starts to float in the box. And whenever he asks how to use it, the officer that he asks responds in kind with, "Duh, you see the 3 buttons? Push this one. It says start. If there's an emergency, push this one. It says stop." And then just kind of walks away. Dahl didn't understand what was going on because it seemed like magic to him. Hence the first conversation that he has with another crewmate that might give them the idea that something may be awry. As their journeys continue, Dahl has a couple of quick, close calls, in which he ends up meeting Jenkins. And Jenkins tells him, "Hey, stay out of the narrative, huh?" Which really kind of flabbergasted Dahl. He didn't know how to handle that. And then he heads back down to the lab and has another conversation, in which he starts to find out that people might have a tracking system to keep up with the officers and where they're at so they can avoid them. Because it seems like there's this really odd number of deaths that surround just those 5 people. And as long as people stay away from those 5 officers, then they stay alive. So in the conversation that he's having with his crewmate, he brings this up. And when he brings it up, he's told, shush. That's about where I'm going to stop. There's a lot of interesting things in this book. The sci-fi that was in it was kind of run-of-the-mill. And the reason why it was run-of-the-mill is because it didn't have to be extraordinary. It's not a book that took itself too serious, and that was enjoyable. However than not, what I enjoyed most was what's about to come next, which are the spoilers. Last warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, you made it this far, you must want to know. Or you've read it and you want to see what I think. Let me say that this was probably one of the better books that I have ever read that has to deal with fourth wall and it being broke. Quite in fact, that fourth wall gets shattered quite well and properly. Now previously I mentioned Dahl and his conversation on the bridge, which had to do with when he was turning in the results from the lab and he had been prompted to say something to the effect of, well, there was a problem with such and such. That way the chief science officer could strut his stuff and tell him what the answer was. But whenever he finishes, he almost gets caught into a conversation and narrowly escapes it. Whenever he's getting ready to leave the bridge, he gets not hoodooed, but kind of sprung jumped by Jenkins. Jenkins tells him, look, if you value your life, stay out of the narrative. Now get off the bridge and never come back. Which made little to no sense to Dahl. But whenever he gets back down to the lab and starts talking about it, then he starts to find out some more interesting things. Like it's Jenkins that has tracking built into the cell phones that everybody uses on the ship. He knows where most of the officers are and which way they're headed and where they might be going to. So for the select few that are senior officers but not chief officers, and Jenkins, he notifies people when those 5 mentioned officers are on their way, so they can stay out of harm's way. That was a very interesting little tidbit. Jenkins ends up being a character that I really like, and for multiple reasons. He's very self-aware, and Dahl is very self-aware, but a lot of the other people that are in this story, they're just trying to get through it. They don't care, and they are trying to just stay as low as possible, and they don't want to know the answers. Now, eventually, Dahl starts to run the numbers on who's responsible for the most deaths, and there seems to be a pattern. Like with one officer, if somebody dies while they're out on a away mission, then the rest of the team is safe as long as they stick close to that officer. One of the officers from the bridge is constantly getting the crap beat out of him, or he's catching infections, or some type of disease, and there is not any safety to be found around that individual. And then there's the captain, etc. I mean, there's all these interesting little details about who dies when, where, and what roles are associated with it, and it really starts to mess with the mind of senior officers because they know if they go with this person, somebody's got to die. And being that Jenkins is a woke individual, he offers a alternative explanation. And that alternate explanation is that they are stuck as fictional characters in a bad sci-fi television drama. And of course, as soon as this is said by Jenkins, some of the people that are around in this meeting are like, oh, no. And then they start to think about it. The astrogator of the crew ends up realizing, yeah, typically I'm a very sane individual. I make good decisions. I'm a very competent astrogator. But whenever the captain says something about an away mission, suddenly it's like something else is in control of me. I get this false bravado. I get this false amount of self-security. I can do anything, or at least that's the way I feel. And so things start to tick into place one by one for them, which ends up they come up with multiple different plans to try to save their bacons, but eventually a plan is hatched to go meet the person writing the stories. So Jenkins, he shuffles through all of his stories or what he thought was episodes that happened, and they end up coming up with a plan to get one of the senior officers from the bridge on a shuttle with them and then shoot themselves towards a black hole. Dahl points out the obvious of, well, we've already done this, why wouldn't it work again? And Jenkins says, well, you see, physics, the rules of physics change when these officers are around. So if you wanted to do it, I wouldn't stop you, feel free, but your body will spaghettify and fall towards the black hole, being stretched out to infinity, and that is, of course, long after you would be killed. So it's safer to take that officer with you to keep that from happening. But of course there's limitations that are put into place because of the writing that happened earlier on in the show, and they have to end up working around it, which becomes quite amusing. Not to mention them going out and meeting their doppelgangers, which were the actual people that starred them in the show. And the kind of ending of the book was just abrupt. But that's the way it should have been, really. Because once they had accomplished what they needed to do, why would they continue? Now, once they meet the writer of the show, the head writer, they end up finding out some personal details about him, one of the people, but ended up making a deal to become the replacement for a producer's son, which was a fairly noble sacrifice, really. And this, of course, happened in one of the codas. But it was also mentioned in the main story, hence why I'm bringing it up. Now for the codas. The codas were some interesting things. In case anybody doesn't know what a coda is, a coda in music is a marking on the paper that tells you to go back to another marking on the paper, which are codas. But I found it kind of odd because typically whenever you have a coda, you have a complete repeat of whatever it is in front of you, musically speaking. But in this case, the only thing it did was tell that particular story for that particular person. We end up in one of the codas having the story of the writer of the Sci-Fi series. And in another coda, we have the story of the young boy that ended up in a coma. And then in another one, we find out about Jenkins and his wife. Because Jenkins does ask for something to be delivered. Even though it was short stories that were completely related to the original story that you read, really they were just little add-ons. And the last portion of the add-ons, the last coda, I really liked the way that ended up. That was a fairly nice touch. So to you, John Scalzi, I would like to say thank you for an excellently wrote book. Highly enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. If you've ever enjoyed Star Trek, if you've ever enjoyed anything where there's that one poor person that doesn't even have a name tag and you know they're not going to get through it, this is the book of them. It was well done. And yay, you've done it. You made it to the end of the video. Congratulations to you. I appreciate it. Thank you for increasing the watch time. If you happen to find a good book in between now and the next video, please let me know about it down there in the description and I will read it along with you and perhaps we could have a conversation about it. If you're new here, please don't forget to subscribe. We'd love to have you join the family and come along with us. And there should be a subscribe button down here somewhere. Click that to join. Please click that bell to make sure that the notifications are turned on because we all know we need some more cowbell in our lives, quite apparently. And if you happen to see anything in the video that you enjoyed or would like to share to somebody else, please feel free to do so. It only helps the channel grow. Thank you so much if you do. Beyond that, this is Shane with Shane's Books and Review. Today's book again was Redshirts, a novel with 3 codas by John Scalzi. Until next time, see you in the next video.